All right. Well, I have had a birthday, and I thought I would take a moment to share some big news about my life and my family, to some extent about this channel. And I thought my birthday might be a good opportunity to do that. So I'm now 37 and retired, and wanted to just give an update to the handful of people who are following me here. What's funny is 99% of the views on this channel come from non-subscribers. So there's very few people who are kind of watching for each and every video that comes out, which is fine. Um, but there are a couple of you, and who knows what this channel will look like in 10 years or something like that. So yeah, I'll just drop the news really quick, and then if you're interested in hearing more details about that, you can stick around, and if not, you can bail. So the big news is that my wife and I and three children will be selling our house, and along with our house, we're basically giving away all of our possessions, and we are moving out of the house and into the van, although not quite. And we're going to be traveling the United States for the next year, probably, or maybe longer. And we're going to be going from campground to campground, campsite to campsite, raising our children on the road, homeschooling on the road. And the most important thing, the most important piece of that is a ministry that we believe God is leading us into, which is evangelizing inside of the national parks. And what that basically means is that, like a missionary might go overseas and tell people about Jesus Christ, we are going to go into the national parks and tell people about Jesus Christ. And so if that interests you at all, stick around. I'll explain what happened and how we got there. And if not, no problem. I wish you well. Have a good day. And maybe poke around the channel, find something else that's interesting to you. Okay, so a quick recap so that you don't have to go watch all of my other videos. So around the time, real quick recap. I was raised in a Christian home. Um, Among the many things that I was taught to cherish and strive for, one of them was to not take on debt. And so my dad always told us, cash is king, and told us about that verse in Proverbs, I forget the number, that says the borrower is a slave to the lender. And they just, my parents, especially my dad, just really encouraged us not to take on debt as kids, my sister and I. And so we did take on debt when we bought a house, but we paid that house off within like 2 years of taking out the mortgage, because we bought a house for $158,000, and at the time I was making around $95,000 a year, something like that, and so we got it paid off quick. And after getting it paid off, we paid it off just before my 30th birthday, and I then kind of didn't know what to do with all of the money that I had coming in every month. We had like an extra $3,000 coming in every month, and we started giving a lot of it away. But we also kind of started scratching our heads and saying, like, what in the world are we going to do with all this extra money for the rest of our lives? And we don't want to really spend it on ourselves. We're happy with our life. We don't want to upgrade all of our furniture and cars and all of that. But we also don't want to retire with $20 million. That's not important to us. And I had a friend who became my financial advisor suggest to me something called FIRE, Financially Independent Retire Early. And I'll let you Google that or watch some other videos of mine. I won't get into all the details, but that really appealed to us. And we decided, make sure my mic's still on, we decided that we were going to race to retirement, which we thought would happen in 3 years when I turned 40. And that would put us in a position where we could say to God, okay, God, you have, $800,000 right here in our bank account. That's yours. You have all of our time, 24/7, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We have no constraints. You can ask us to do anything and everything, and we're in a position where we can say yes. And that was our goal. And we really didn't pray about that. We didn't seek counsel about that. It just seemed like this obviously good thing to do, to basically take steps towards making our life more flexible, making ourselves more surrendered, and basically putting kind of more tools in the toolbox that could be used for anything and everything later. Anyway, so fast forward, I moved from the factory at Volkswagen to the engineering center at Volkswagen, and God used a particular person in my life named Slav to really accelerate that process. And in May of 2023, about a year and a half ago, I resigned from Volkswagen. God really had given me that final measure of peace to say it's now time to leave. And instead of leaving with like $800,000 which is what the FIRE financial philosophy would have said I needed. I left Volkswagen with about $400,000 in cash invested in the market and things like that, plus owning our home and owning our cars and having no debt. So we kind of thought that he was going to call us out of Volkswagen and right into missions, and we would be shipped off to Africa or Asia or something like that. And that didn't happen. And it was okay. It wasn't like this, panic, like, oh no, we did something wrong. But it did feel kind of odd that we weren't going from one thing to another. And so I've spent the last 18 months um, as a full-time dad. We homeschool our kids, and we've done a lot of traveling together, as you may see on the channel. I've gone on some mission trips to Puerto Rico and India, and I've been pretty involved at our church. I've been a chairman of the deacons for the last several years, and we teach a Sunday school, and we teach on Wednesday nights, and I'm on the missions board, and so there's all kinds of good things going on. But it also felt like it was a time of transition when there would become a time when all of a sudden, this new thing would come. And that was a real struggle for me. I think that one of the main things God has been teaching me in the last 18 months is that working for Him, working for His kingdom, is nothing like working for an employer. When an employer has work for you to do, if you don't do that work, it won't get done unless they assign it to someone else. And that work that's being assigned to you in some way is a type of need. The employer needs you to get that work done. And with God, it's not like that. You could consider the fact that He created this entire world with nothing but His voice, and any need that He might have, is nothing that He's relying on us for. You could think about how it says that heaven is paved with gold. He does not need our money. He doesn't need our skills. And so I've come to understand and become convinced of that when God invites you to join Him in His work or asks you to work for Him, it's not out of a need that He has. And the analogy that came to my mind that has been helpful for me is it's kind of like God is the director of like a symphony, and He's preparing a song, and you could sit in the audience in the first row or the 20th row or in the balcony, and you could listen to it and observe it and enjoy it. But He knows that the best way to enjoy the symphony is to take part in it. And so He assigns you an instrument like a flute, and He tells you, which buttons on the flute to push and how often He wants you to blow on that flute and make a noise. And you get to contribute to what He's doing. And so I feel like I have unlearned and relearned what it means to work. I've learned to not put so much pride in my achievements and a bunch of other stuff like that. Anyway, I'm going to try and get along here. So my wife and I recently celebrated 15 years of marriage. And because I don't have a job and because we don't have the constraints of time, we decided to take 3 weeks and go travel out west to Yosemite and Zion National Park and do a bunch of hiking and climbing. So we drove to Michigan, we dropped my kids off at my parents' house, and then we flew out west. And while we were flying out west, we at some point we were praying, and I just said out loud to the Lord in prayer, God, the Good Samaritan had plans that day. We all know the story of the Good Samaritan. He was walking along, he saw someone in need, he dropped what he was doing, he helped that guy, and that's an example of how we all are to live. And it just dawned on me that, that Good Samaritan had plans. Like, he wasn't just bored going for a walk. Like, he probably had business plans or family plans or plans with a friend. And he dropped those plans to care for someone in need. And so we were flying out west, and I just prayed. My wife and I were praying together, and I just said out loud to the Lord, Lord, we surrender this trip to you. We surrender our plans. There's hikes and climbs and overnights that we want to do. There's things we want to see, but we surrender that to you. And our time is not our own, and we submit and surrender this trip and our plans and our time to you, like the Good Samaritan. And so we just invited God to lead us and guide us through this trip, even though we had plans, even though we had an agenda, but just to lead us. And He didn't really send any, beaten up and bruised guy our way who we cared for, but we did have an incredible amount of really deep conversations with people, much more so than I've ever experienced in my life. Now, you could call that coincidence if you want. That's fine. You could call it divine appointments, the Lord's leading. People name those things differently, but I call them divine appointments. I believe that the Holy Spirit was leading those people and Michelle and I into conversations. And we found that people in general were extremely open minded and curious and excited to share and receive stories of what was going on in their life. And I'm not sure exactly why that was. I, at the end, began to realize that people are perhaps in a more exploratory mood. You know, they've traveled from Europe or they've traveled within the United States and they're in Yosemite Valley and they're seeing these beautiful things. And they're just kind of in this adventurous, open, exploratory mood. And perhaps some of that transfers, to the mind and heart, not just, the eyeballs. And just give one simple example. We were in Yosemite, we were at Tenaya Lake, and we were chatting with this 19-year-old guy from France, Francois. And he said to us, I always thought France was the most beautiful country, but then I've come here and I realized I'm wrong. And then over the next couple paragraphs, he essentially said what could be summarized as, I wonder what else I'm wrong about. And we met a lot of people from Germany, and we had great conversations with them because we had lived there. We met this amazing girl from South Africa, Roxy, and just had incredible conversations with her. There were some incredible coincidences that were at a level where for me, I just can't call that a coincidence anymore. It's like when you're on a backpacking trip and you say like, oh, the ground is a little bit clear there. There's nothing growing. It looks like there's been a lot of footprints. Maybe that's a trail, and then someone else says, well, that's just a coincidence. And then you take another step and another step and another step, and the path continues to be clear for you, and there continues to be no leaves and no debris. And it's like at some point, it stops being a coincidence. It stops being a set of coincidences where the ground is clear and it starts becoming a path, and you start recognizing that someone has made this path. And that's what happened to us. So we were on our way back from our trip out west, and even though we had gone to the top of Half Dome and hiked on El Cap and hiked the Narrows and done a multi-pitch climb, the most exciting and satisfying part of our trip for my wife and I had been the conversations that we had had with other people. Sometimes my mic goes out, so I have to check it. And we were already planning on going out west in 2025 because my son's turning 9 next year, and we have a tradition where we celebrate the 9th birthday because it's halfway to 18, which is adulthood in this country. So we were already going to go out west for a couple months next year. And we started thinking and talking about, well, what are we going to do with the house? And could we loan it to someone? Should we rent it? We don't have to pay someone to keep an eye on it. And this idea surfaced that perhaps we should sell it. And then we realized that perhaps what God might have for us is to go out west and to live our lives as we enjoy living them, hiking, biking, kayaking, climbing, sleeping outside, exploring the national parks, homeschooling on the road, talking to strangers, and being his witness, testifying of the goodness of Christ, telling people our story if they'd like to hear it, asking people about their story, and just coming into these deep conversations with people of all kinds. We talk to all kinds of Europeans who travel a lot in the national parks. And we just kind of thought about maybe God had given us like this preview of what a ministry could look like for our family. And so we started talking about it with our kids, and we were very sober with the kids. Like, we did not say like, oh, kids, it'll be like endless hiking and climbing and bliss and unicorns and rainbows. Like, we're like, no, like if we were to do this, like we would have to sell our house and the vast majority of our possessions and the vast majority of your toys. And there would be times when it would be 2 a.m. and we'd be in a tent and you'd have diarrhea, and you couldn't just walk across the hall to our bathroom. You would have to walk 100 yards to the camp bathroom. And like this has elements of toughness. There would be rain and cold and snow, and we decided that we would take a week to pray about it. And we prayed from Sunday to Sunday, and every evening and every morning we prayed together as a family. We encouraged the children to pray on their own. As the children read their Bibles on their own, we encourage them to look for some sort of evidence or indicators that they might read in Scripture to reinforce this idea, or to speak against it. And we encourage the children not to talk to each other and not to talk to us about what they had been hearing or seeing, not that we kind of influence each other. And it's probably a bit too much to get into all of the details, but what I will say is after 7 days of prayer, all five of us had two things. We had a very significant inner peace about this change in our life. We had counted the cost, we had thought of the downsides, the rain and the snow and the storms that will come, but we all had a peace. And none of us had turmoil or confusion in our hearts or anything like that. And the Bible says that God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. And the other thing is, we all had a lot of evidence. Throughout the week, I just have a chronological Bible reading plan, and I just continually came across things that reinforce this idea. I was reading in Matthew, talking about the rich young ruler who sells all of his possessions, should sell all of his possessions to give to the poor. Then the disciples say, what about us? We left everything for you. And Jesus says, I tell you the truth, anyone who leaves house or land or father or mother for my name's sake will be rewarded. My wife had been reading through Hebrews, and just all of these details and examples of people taking steps of faith. And I was reading through also Ecclesiastes, and man, it just hit me so hard just how many things in my life are trivial and unimportant. Even people who don't believe in God, don't believe in eternity, would say things in my life are trivial and unimportant. And at the end of 7 days, my wife and I and the children were completely convinced and at peace that this was the step that we were supposed to take as a family. And we are essentially following the path that Jesus prescribes for the rich young ruler. We are really not selling anything. We don't really want to sell any of our things. We're giving them to friends and family and neighbors and strangers and donation centers. We'll be selling the house in the spring, but we're not quite sure what we're going to do with that money. And it's been already, we've been at it now for about 6 weeks. It's been already, just a crazy experience to just say goodbye to your possessions, of which we have many, and say goodbye to this workshop and all these tools and all of the things we've collected and all of the things we've come to treasure to some extent. And on the one hand, it feels incredibly freeing. I mean, every time we get rid of something, it almost feels like the helium balloons attached to our shoulders, lift us off the ground a little bit more, because we're like cutting away the weight that holds us down. It's extremely exciting. On the other hand, it's very painful. My identity is wrapped up, in these tools. I can have knowledge about how to fix things, but if I don't have the tools, my bare hands are almost useless. And so this identity that I've had of, being able to fix things and help people and being able to borrow tools from, and my identity is like being stripped away. And we had some friends in town recently, and he took some of my tools, which I offered to him, and I said goodbye to things that I'd owned for like 20 years, a half-inch snap-on ratchet. It was like, oh my gosh, I remember when I bought that, and I remember how many things I fixed with that, and it's like, it's gone, and now I don't have a long ratchet anymore. And I mean, it's like, it's weird. And we've already tried to live our life without lots of possessions. That might be debated by some, but yeah, it's been really interesting. And literally just last week, 2 days ago, at our church, the sermon, the pastor basically said, the greatest lie, the greatest obstacle in the American Christian life is our love for things. And I would have already put myself in a category of people who doesn't love things that much. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm delusional, but even as someone who normally keeps a fairly loose grip on things, it's been really challenging, and really just like it's like this turmoil. It's just like, oh, that thing, I want it, and yet it's very helpful to just think about how in 60 years those things won't be mine anyway. I'll be dead. And also, most of the things I have in 60 years won't be worth much. They will have rotted or rusted or torn or be obsolete, or they won't be using lithium-ion batteries anymore. And anyhow, so that's the big news about my family. And so I was going to make a joke and change the channel name from 35 and Retired to 37 and Homeless, but I decided not to do that. We're not going to get an RV. We're just going to stay in the van for a period of time. We really enjoy backpacking and the minimalism that comes with that. And we've decided to just apply that to our life for a season. We still have around $400,000 in investments and in cash because that amount that I had when I left Volkswagen continues to grow in the market. So we're going to be okay on money for a while. And what we think will happen, and we're holding these plans loosely, as it says in James 4, what we think will happen is we will go spend about a year on the road. We're going to go west. We're going to go north to Alaska. We're going to see the Canadian parts. And then I think we're going to return back to this area in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And in the spring of 2026, we're going to hike the Appalachian Trail as a family and continue the same sort of wilderness evangelism, telling people about Jesus as they show interest and as we get engaged in these conversations. And then the last piece of the plan, it's really an idea, is that for the last like 6 years of fatherhood, while I have children before they become adults, we might spend like the following 6 years in like 6 different places in the world. So we might go spend, a year back in India where I was earlier this year. We might go spend a year in, Argentina or Ecuador. We might go spend a year back in Germany where we live. We might spend a year somewhere in Africa and raise our children sort of in the world, showing them that there's more than Ottawa and Chattanooga and Tennessee in the United States. 95% of the people live outside the United States. And living in the United States is very hard to get outside the borders. It's expensive. You have to fly. You have to have a bunch of vacation days. But we want our children to know the world, to love the world. The people of the world is really what I mean. The culture, and to some extent to just be comfortable. To be comfortable being minority. To be comfortable, eating food you've never tried before. Using bathrooms that have no toilet paper. Just to be like a global citizen or a global Christian. And we're not quite sure, God hasn't spoken that clearly on that topic, but we think perhaps that's the direction that he's leading us. And right now we are totally confident that he's leading us to take these steps, and where they lead next is really quite unknown. But that's the big news for the channel. And what that also means is the channel is going to shift away from, fixing weed whackers and chainsaws here at the house. And there's going to be a lot more outdoor content, traveling content, van life content, things like that. So I'm going to try and keep things organized with the playlists. But I wanted to share that with the world, I guess. And this YouTube channel has become kind of like a cross section of my life, or as Roxy from South Africa put it, a life journal. And so it's just going to kind of ebb and flow, and hopefully it remains interesting to some people. And if not, you can unsubscribe, and it doesn't hurt my feelings at all. So, all right, I think that's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you're still watching, God bless you, and see you soon.